Growing up, I always knew something was off. It was subtle at first, just a feeling that my younger brother, Ryan, held a special place in our parents' hearts. Carol and George, my parents, never outright said it, but their actions screamed it. I'd spend weeks preparing for a school project, pouring my heart into every detail, only to have it dismissed with a distracted nod. Ryan, on the other hand, would scribble a stick figure drawing, and they'd frame it like it was a masterpiece. One incident sticks out vividly. I was turning 10, and my parents had promised me a big birthday party. Invitations were sent, decorations were bought, and I could barely sleep the night before. The morning of the party, Ryan threw a tantrum because he had a minor fever, barely 99 degrees. Instead of consoling him and letting the party proceed, my parents canceled everything. I spent the day watching balloons deflate and eating leftover cake in silence. Moments like that left scars I didn't even realize were forming. Even as we grew older, the favoritism didn't fade. When I graduated college with honors, my parents congratulated me with a brief call. When Ryan barely scraped through community college, they threw a massive celebration, complete with speeches about his perseverance. It wasn't just frustrating, it was gut-wrenching. Over time, I learned not to expect much from them, pouring my energy instead into building a life of my own. Against the odds, I carved out a life I'm proud of. I married Melissa, a woman whose warmth and support felt like a balm to my battered soul. Together, we built a home filled with love and laughter, and our son, Lucas, became my world. Professionally, I thrived, climbing the corporate ladder to a position that provided us with stability and comfort. Ryan, meanwhile, drifted. He never held a steady job, still lived with our parents, and relied on them for everything from his phone bill to his groceries. They enabled him, of course, always ready with excuses for why he deserved a free pass in life. Despite everything, I tried to maintain a relationship with my family. It wasn't easy. Every visit to my parents' house felt like stepping back into my childhood, a flood of old resentments threatening to drown me. But I kept going, partly for my kids and partly out of a stubborn hope that things might change. When Lucas's first birthday approached, Melissa suggested we celebrate at our house. But my parents insisted on hosting it, saying it would be a chance for the whole family to come together. I hesitated. My gut told me it was a bad idea, but Melissa, ever the optimist, convinced me to give it a shot. She believed in the power of family, even when I didn't. The day of the party arrived, and we packed up the car with gifts, decorations, and an elaborate cake Melissa had baked herself. As we pulled into my parents' driveway, I couldn't shake the sense of unease settling over me. Their house looked the same as always, but something felt off. Maybe it was the way my mother's smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she greeted us, or the fact that Ryan hadn't bothered to come out and help carry things inside. Either way, I pushed the feeling aside, determined to make the day about Lucas and not my lingering bitterness. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. My parents had set up a few decorations, but nothing close to what they'd done for Ryan's countless celebrations over the years. The guests trickled in, a mix of relatives and family friends, most of whom I hadn't seen in ages. Lucas, oblivious to the undercurrents, was the star of the show, toddling around and delighting everyone with his infectious giggles. Then Ryan showed up. Late, of course, and without so much as a card for Lucas. Instead, he brought his latest girlfriend, a woman who looked bored out of her mind the entire time. My parents' faces lit up when they saw him, as if he were the guest of honor. My mother even fussed over him, asking if he'd eaten and if he needed anything. It was like we were extras in a play where Ryan was the star. Still, I gritted my teeth and played along. The day wasn't about me or my frustrations. It was about Lucas. But as the hours dragged on, I couldn't ignore the old wounds that were reopening. Every laugh my parents shared with Ryan, every dismissive glance they threw my way, felt like a slap. By the time the cake was cut, I was seething inside, struggling to keep my emotions in check. And then it happened. A comment, casual and offhand, but enough to shatter the fragile peace I'd been clinging to. My mother, in front of everyone, remarked how lucky I was that Ryan had agreed to come, given how busy he was. The implication was clear: even on my son's special day, Ryan's presence was the real gift. I felt the weight of years of resentment boiling over, threatening to erupt. But instead of causing a scene, I swallowed it down, channeling all my energy into making the rest of the day as smooth as possible for Lucas's sake. The party had already begun to feel like a powder keg, each interaction stoking the embers of old wounds. I had been doing my best to keep things light, focusing on Lucas and his innocent joy, but the undercurrent of tension was impossible to ignore. Ryan's tardy entrance with his indifferent girlfriend had been the first strike. The second came when he plopped himself down at the center of the gathering, immediately monopolizing the conversation with tales of his latest antics. It was like he'd forgotten, or didn't care, that the day was about Lucas. I tried to let it go, I really did. I played the polite host, circulating between guests, making sure everyone was comfortable. But when I saw Ryan helping himself to the cake Melissa had spent hours perfecting, slicing into it with all the grace of a toddler, something in me snapped. I took a deep breath and approached the kitchen, needing a moment to compose myself. Fate, however, had other plans. As I turned with a plate of hors d'oeuvres in hand, Ryan brushed past me with his usual disregard for personal space. In the process, the plate tipped, sending a cascade of spinach puffs tumbling directly onto his shirt, his prized gaming shirt, emblazoned with some obscure logo he'd paid far too much for. I froze, horrified, immediately apologizing and reaching for a napkin. But Ryan's reaction was swift and volcanic. He recoiled like I'd dumped boiling water on him, his face twisting into a mask of outrage. His voice cut through the party chatter, drawing every pair of eyes in the room as he berated me for my carelessness and the supposed ruination of his shirt. The scene was mortifying, a slow-motion car crash I couldn't steer away from. And then, he crossed a line I never expected him to. With a single fluid motion, he raised his hand and slapped me. Hard. The sharp crack echoed in the stunned silence that followed. For a moment, time seemed to stop. My face stung, but the real pain was deeper, in the core of my being. I looked around, hoping, praying, for some kind of intervention, some acknowledgement of the humiliation I just endured. But it didn't come. Instead, my parents rushed to Ryan's side. My mother fretted over his shirt, dabbing at it with a damp cloth, while my father muttered something about how stressful Ryan's life had been lately. Not one word of concern was directed toward me. It was as if the slap had never happened, as if my pain was invisible. The guests exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to step in or pretend nothing had happened. Most chose the latter. Melissa, bless her, was the first to break the paralysis. She came to my side, her expression a mixture of shock and fury. Her silent support gave me the strength to do what I'd been avoiding for years. I turned to my parents, the words spilling out before I could second-guess myself. Years of suppressed resentment poured forth, a torrent of anger and hurt. I laid it all bare, the favoritism, the dismissals, the countless moments when their indifference had left me feeling less than. Their reactions were predictable: defensiveness from my father, tears from my mother. They made excuses, blamed circumstances, and even tried to deflect by bringing up my own supposed flaws. But I'd heard it all before, and I was done. For the first time, I didn't back down. I didn't let their justifications silence me. The room was heavy with tension as I picked up Lucas and turned to leave. Melissa followed, her hand gripping my arm in solidarity. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, a strange sense of relief washed over me. The anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but so was something else: clarity. I'd spent my whole life chasing approval that was never going to come, and in that moment, I realized I didn't need it anymore. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Melissa reached over and squeezed my hand, a gesture that said more than words ever could. Lucas, blissfully unaware of the chaos he'd just witnessed, babbled softly in the back seat. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his innocent smile a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt inside. He deserved better than this. We all did. As we pulled into our driveway, I made a silent vow. I would no longer allow myself to be a punching bag for my family's dysfunction. The ties that had bound me to them, ties woven from obligation and guilt, were fraying, and I wasn't going to mend them. Not this time. For the sake of my own family, for Melissa and Lucas, would put up boundaries and finally stand firm. This was the beginning of something new, and though it scared me, it also felt like freedom. The next 2 years passed in what felt like a dream. After severing ties with my parents, Melissa and I found a rhythm that was entirely our own. Without the constant undercurrent of familial drama, our lives took on a peaceful simplicity. Lucas grew from a babbling toddler into a curious little boy, his laughter filling our home with warmth. And then there was the arrival of Lily, our unexpected blessing. Her birth brought a new layer of joy to our lives, solidifying the sense that we were building something strong and unshakable together. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I'd catch myself reminiscing about the family gatherings we used to have, the illusion of unity that once masked the deeper issues. But those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the happiness we'd created for ourselves. Melissa's unwavering support and the pure, unconditional love of our children became my anchor, grounding me in the life I had chosen to prioritize. Then came the call that threatened to unravel everything. It was late in the evening, and Melissa was putting Lucas and Lily to bed. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the caller ID displaying my mother's name. I hesitated before answering, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. For 2 years, there had been silence between us, and I wasn't sure I was ready to break it. When I answered, her voice was trembling, thick with tears. She spoke in hurried, fragmented sentences, the words tumbling out as if she was afraid she might lose her nerve. Ryan had betrayed them, she said. He had manipulated them into transferring the house into his name, promising it was just a formality to help with taxes or some other excuse. But now, he was selling it. The house, the one they'd lived in for decades, was no longer theirs. My father was devastated, she added, his health declining under the weight of the stress. But that wasn't the worst of it. As she spoke, a darker truth emerged. The house had never truly belonged to my parents. It had been left to me by my grandfather, Henry, years ago. A fact they had conveniently hidden from me, intending to quietly pass it on to Ryan when the time came. Hearing this was like a punch to the gut. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. They hadn't just dismissed me, they had actively conspired to deny me something that was rightfully mine. My mother's pleas for help rang hollow in my ears. She wanted me to intervene, to stop Ryan from selling the house, to somehow make things right. But the sheer audacity of her request left me speechless. After years of enduring their favoritism, their neglect, their refusal to acknowledge my worth, they now expected me to clean up the mess they'd created. A mess born of their own choices, their own deceit. I ended the call without giving her an answer, my mind racing. Melissa found me in the kitchen, staring at the phone as if it might offer some clarity. When I told her what had happened, her expression shifted from shock to anger. She was my rock, as always, but even she couldn't hide her disgust at the situation. Over the next few days, I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to turn my back on them completely, to let them face the consequences of their actions without my interference. They had made their bed, after all. But another part of me, the part that still clung to some thread of loyalty or perhaps guilt, wasn't so sure. Could I really abandon them in their time of need, even after everything they'd done? The memories of my grandfather complicated things further. Henry had been one of the few constants in my life, a source of kindness and wisdom in an otherwise turbulent childhood. He had left the house to me for a reason, and it felt like a betrayal of his memory to let Ryan profit from it. But taking action meant stepping back into the toxic web of my family, a place I had fought so hard to escape. The dilemma consumed me, stealing sleep and peace of mind. Melissa urged me to think carefully, reminding me that whatever choice I made would have lasting consequences. She wasn't pushing me one way or the other, but her support gave me the strength to face the situation head-on. I knew I couldn't ignore it forever. A decision had to be made, one way or another. The decision to act came slowly, but when it did, I knew there was no turning back. Melissa's steady presence and the memory of my grandfather's integrity were my guiding lights. I contacted a lawyer, laying out the convoluted history of the house and Ryan's betrayal. The process was grueling, every step revealing just how deep Ryan's treachery ran. The investigation uncovered that he hadn't just manipulated our parents, he had forged documents to claim ownership of the property. The level of deceit was staggering, even for him. As the legal battle unfolded, Ryan's world began to crumble. Court orders were issued, and the fraudulent transfer of the house was reversed. He was given a deadline to vacate, but true to form, he didn't go quietly. His desperation became more apparent with each passing day, his behavior growing erratic and volatile. He even resorted to threatening family members, including my parents, who had always shielded him from the consequences of his actions. It was a bitter irony that the very people who had enabled him were now his targets. Through it all, I maintained my distance. My priority was Melissa, Lucas, and Lily. The safety and stability of my own family came first, and I refused to let Ryan's chaos disrupt the life we had built. My lawyer handled most of the communication, shielding me from the worst of the drama. Still, the emotional toll was heavy. It was one thing to know my brother was selfish and manipulative, it was another to see the full extent of his greed laid bare. Ryan's eviction was a turning point. The house was no longer his, and the law ensured he had no claim to it. But his departure was far from graceful. On the day he left, he vandalized the property, smashing windows and leaving behind a mess that spoke of his fury and entitlement. My lawyer assured me that this would only strengthen my case against him, but it was hard to find solace in that. The house, once a symbol of my grandfather's love and legacy, had become a battleground. In the midst of this chaos, my parents reached out again. This time, their tone was different. There was no denial, no excuses, only desperation. They begged me to let them stay in the house, admitting their mistakes and revealing the full extent of their favoritism toward Ryan. They spoke of their regret, their realization that they had enabled his worst tendencies, and their fear of what the future held for them now that they had lost everything. Their words stirred a mix of emotions in me. Part of me wanted to shut them out, to let them face the consequences of their choices without my intervention. But another part, the part that still valued family despite everything, couldn't ignore their plight. Melissa's advice was clear and unwavering: if I chose to help them, it had to be on my terms. Boundaries were essential, not just for my sake but for the sake of my children. I agreed to let them stay in the house, but with strict conditions. They had to respect my family's space and independence, and there would be no more enabling of Ryan's behavior. They also had to contribute to the upkeep of the property, taking responsibility for their role in maintaining it. It wasn't an easy decision, and I knew it wouldn't solve all the underlying issues. But it was a step toward reclaiming the legacy my grandfather had left behind and redefining what family meant to me. The aftermath of the legal battle left its scars. My parents' relationship with Ryan was irrevocably damaged, and the rift between them and me was still healing. But amidst the pain and loss, there was also growth. I had stood up for myself and my family, breaking the cycle of dysfunction that had defined my childhood. The house, though battered and in need of repair, was once again a place of potential, a chance to build something new. Life didn't return to normal immediately after the dust settled from the legal battle. The house, battered and scarred from Ryan's parting tantrum, felt like a symbol of the damage that had been inflicted on our family. But with determination and a clear sense of purpose, I began to rebuild, not just the property, but the fragile ties that still connected me to my parents. My first step was to establish rules. I made it clear that if my parents were to stay in the house, they would need to contribute. Rent wasn't negotiable, even if it was a modest amount, and they had to actively participate in therapy to address the years of dysfunction that had defined our relationships. They accepted these terms without protest, their desperation outweighing any resistance to change. Ryan, on the other hand, was barred from the house entirely. An apologetic email from him arrived weeks later, filled with hollow words and vague promises of reform. I didn't respond. My decision was final: he would no longer have a place in my life. Therapy proved to be a turning point, though not an easy one. For the first time, my parents were forced to confront the consequences of their favoritism. George, who had always been the more stoic of the two, began to open up in ways I hadn't thought possible. He admitted that their actions had driven me away, acknowledging the role they had played in creating the divide between us. Carol's journey was more fraught, her guilt manifesting in waves of tears and defensiveness. But slowly, with the help of a patient therapist, she began to see the patterns of behavior that had enabled Ryan's entitlement while diminishing my own sense of worth. Their progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when old habits resurfaced, and tensions flared. But there were also breakthroughs. Hearing George apologize without deflection or excuse was something I never thought I'd experience. Seeing Carol take responsibility for her actions, even in small ways, felt like a step toward healing. It wasn't perfect, and it would never erase the past, but it was a start. Through it all, I found myself reflecting on the concept of family. Growing up, I had equated family with loyalty, a blind, unwavering commitment to those bound to you by blood, no matter how much they hurt you. But this experience had taught me a different lesson. Respect, I realized, was more valuable than loyalty. Respect had to be earned, nurtured through actions, not demanded through obligation. Melissa was my constant through this process, her insight and support guiding me when doubts crept in. Lucas and Lily were my anchors, their laughter and innocence reminding me of what truly mattered. I wanted to build a legacy for them, one that was free from the toxic dynamics I had grown up with. That meant standing firm in my boundaries, even when it was uncomfortable or met with resistance. As months turned into a year, the house began to transform. Repairs were made, the scars of Ryan's rampage slowly erased. My parents settled into their new roles, taking ownership of their responsibilities and making an effort to contribute. It wasn't perfect, and there were days when the weight of the past still hung heavy. But there was progress, however slow and imperfect. Ryan's absence was a stark contrast to the years he had dominated our family's narrative. Without him as a constant source of conflict, there was room for growth and change. His attempts to re-enter our lives, through sporadic emails or messages passed through distant relatives, were met with firm silence. I had learned that some ties were better left severed, not out of spite, but out of a need for self-preservation. Looking back, I could see how far we had come. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still wounds that might never fully heal. But for the first time, I felt a sense of agency in my relationships with my parents. I had reclaimed the house, not just as a physical space, but as a symbol of my own growth and resilience. The boundaries I had set were a testament to the value of self-respect and accountability, both for myself and for those around me. In the quiet moments, when the house was filled with the sounds of my children playing or Melissa's laughter, I felt a deep sense of peace. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had chosen a different path, one built on respect, honesty, and the unwavering belief that family was about more than just blood. It was about the choices we made, the relationships we nurtured, and the legacy we created for those who came after us. In the months that followed, the ripple effects of Ryan's choices continued to play out. Stripped of his ill-gotten gains and left to fend for himself, he found himself navigating a life he had long avoided, one of accountability. He took a menial job at a local warehouse, a far cry from the easy, indulgent existence he had enjoyed for so many years. Without the financial and emotional safety net of our parents, his entitlement had no room to grow. The shift was stark and unmissable. For the first time, Ryan was forced to confront the reality of his actions and the toll they had taken on everyone around him. He sent another email, this one more thoughtful and measured than his previous attempts. In it, he acknowledged his mistakes and expressed regret for the pain he had caused. But the wounds he had inflicted ran deep, and trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. I read his words carefully, noting the absence of excuses or deflections, but I didn't respond. Forgiveness, if it came, would be on my terms and in my own time. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents began to take on a new shape. The therapy sessions had helped them recognize the patterns of favoritism and neglect that had defined our family for so long. They still stumbled at times, old habits occasionally resurfacing, but the effort they made was evident. Small gestures, a genuine apology, an unprompted word of encouragement, began to bridge the chasm that had grown between us. Family gatherings became tentative and infrequent, each one a delicate balance of past grievances and present efforts. Melissa's steady presence and the joy of Lucas and Lily often served as the glue that held these moments together. There were no grand reconciliations, no sweeping declarations of forgiveness. Instead, there was a quiet, cautious rebuilding of trust, one interaction at a time. I maintained firm boundaries, ensuring that my parents understood the limits of their involvement in my life. These gatherings were a privilege, not a right, contingent on their continued respect for the family I had built with Melissa. Through all of this, I found myself reflecting on the lessons this journey had taught me. Growing up, I had believed that family was an unbreakable bond, a relationship that demanded loyalty above all else. But the years of conflict and healing had reshaped that belief. Family, I realized, wasn't about blind allegiance or unconditional tolerance of harmful behavior. It was about respect, accountability, and the willingness to grow and change. Lucas and Lily became my compass in this reflection. Everything I did, every boundary I set, was with them in mind. I wanted them to understand that love and respect went hand in hand, that standing up for oneself didn't mean abandoning others, but rather valuing one's own well-being as much as theirs. They deserved a family dynamic built on honesty and mutual care, not one weighed down by guilt and resentment. The house, now restored and vibrant once more, became a symbol of this new chapter. Its walls held the memories of a painful past but also the promise of a better future. It was where Melissa and I raised our children, where laughter echoed in the hallways, and where the scars of the past no longer defined our present. Ryan's absence remained a quiet undercurrent, a reminder of the cost of unchecked entitlement and the necessity of accountability. I didn't close the door on him entirely, but I left it ajar with clear conditions. If he wanted to be a part of our lives again, it would require genuine effort and sustained change. Until then, I focused on what mattered most, the family I had chosen to build and protect. As I stood in the backyard one evening, watching Lucas chase Lily under the warm glow of the setting sun, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been tumultuous, filled with pain and hard choices, but it had led to something far greater than I could have imagined. I had reclaimed not just a house, but my sense of self, my values, and the legacy I wanted to leave for my children. Family, I realized, wasn't a static concept. It was fluid, shaped by the choices we made and the boundaries we set. It wasn't defined by blood alone, but by the respect and love we cultivated within it. And as I watched my children's laughter fill the air, I knew that the lessons I had learned would guide us all toward a brighter, healthier future.